Welcome to the Lucentlands Podcast. We have identified the need for a platform where industry leaders and innovators in the agricultural sector can share their stories and inspire others. We hope you enjoy listening to this as much as we enjoyed speaking to these people. Welcome.
It's nice to be here with you.
And thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys here.
Okay, so like we've discussed now before we press record, is just tell us who you are and what you do.
Okay, I'm Renee Prins. I moved to Worcester at the end of the 90s, and because my husband got a nice job offer here, but the result of that was that I was out of a science job and I couldn't find a job in Worcester that is in my field. I'm a plant geneticist. I studied agriculture with plant genetics, and that has been my passion all my life. So I had to create my own job here in Worcester, and that's where an idea started to create a lab, which I called CenGen. It's like an acronym for Central Genetics, where I thought I can play a role in South African agriculture to get DNA technologies implemented. Because in the 1990s, very few DNA work sort of happened in our field or in agriculture. And I got frustrated with that, and I thought that this is a kind of an opportunity, and let me give it a try. So I started very small, little lab and built it next to my home.
Just you alone?
Just myself. In 2003, I registered the company, built a lab, moved into the lab in 2005, and then soon realized I will need people to help me, and employed my first staff member in 2005. And then I just took it step by step, and over time we grew. So we moved to this building in 2012 in the center of town. It's a bit odd. It's like between all the medical practices, but in a way we feel we are also in the scientific field. So CenGen.
I've got a question. And you guys are the same age group demographic. I'm younger. What agriculture was always this men's thing? What made you decide to go into agriculture back then? And also and in the scientific aspect of it, because I think if you talk science and agriculture now, people know about it, but back then it was, we plant a tree and we pick something.
Okay. I was fortunate. I grew up on a farm in the Eastern Cape. Okay. So I always loved space and the activities happening, but I was also I'm very realistic about farming. I don't have an idealistic view of it. I think it's a very tough job. They have to deal with so many factors that they cannot control. So I admire producers, or like I call them. But so I knew I don't want to farm, but I like to find out things. I'm curious about things, and I was also fortunate to have an uncle who was a scientist and worked in the field. And in grade 11, I discovered genetics in the biology curriculum. And I realized that this is very, very interesting. And when I spoke to him, he said to me, he thinks that is a good career opportunity path. So I decided to study BSc Agriculture. And we were about, I think, 7 students, females, in 100, roughly, if I have to estimate, BSc Agricultural students in 1984. And it was a bit odd, but I always found the whole community very, how can you say, open and welcoming. I never felt that I'm not welcome in the field. Yeah.
Well, it's just a weird
It was an unusual choice at that time.
Yes.
But I must say, I understand what you say, is that it was an unusual choice, but there weren't necessarily barriers.
Yeah.
It just wasn't something that
Yes.
came up as a first choice for a woman to make.
Yes.
But I'm quite amazed that you ended up in Worcester and you were brave enough to start thinking about doing something like this on your own. I mean, very few younger people would think like that. They think, I have to find a job. But
Yeah.
here you were creating your own job. That's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, so the reality was I had a job. And because I didn't want to be the sole income provider to the family, I had to go where my husband had to go to pursue that. So the reality was I moved to a town where there wasn't a job. And I was a bit naive in the sense that I thought I was going to do a kind of a consultancy job. But very quickly I got so frustrated with things not happening on a practical level that I realized I need a lab to make it happen. Yeah. Yeah, so I just took it step by step, starting small with no business background, and people with business background will probably tell you should approach it differently, but it worked for me to take it step by step, to grow the client base, to convince the funders to invest in a private entity, because at the time it wasn't heard of. I mean, the funding is only provided to big institutions, and I really had to prove with the kind of data delivery and the projects we did and the outcomes we generated in a quick and fast manner that it is good to give a private entity also a chance in research, yeah, and make things happen.
Well, if I listen to what you described, how you set this up, and it was you, a woman on her own, doing this, basically what big corporates would say in your backyard at home, I would imagine you would have had to work double as hard to prove yourself and actually get that funding. I would imagine that must have been quite a big barrier for you to overcome.
Yeah, so I think what you do in the beginning, you forfeit many things. I didn't think about what my income would be or that kind of thing initially. I focused on getting the company established and convince industry that we can make a difference. So maybe that is not always what people want to do. They first want to know what they will benefit from it.
Yes.
I knew I had to invest a lot, and it's not easy for an individual to start a business in South Africa. The regulatory things in place is really not supporting small companies to start.
Especially in the science field.
I would say in every field, because you have to meet so many strict requirements and rules by government, like just to get registered for VAT. It's a challenge for some people. You have to pay an accountant, and yeah, you need some money to do that. And yeah, I was lucky to meet the right people here in Worcester that I'm still working with. But so the investment from my side, was a lot on a personal level, like you say. To get going.
So you've told us about where you started, but we're sitting in your building now. I think it would be good if you can sketch where you are today, the journey you've walked, and what is CenGen today?
I think 19 years later, we are a well-known name in the community in terms of the scientific community and the agricultural field. Maybe not that known in town because we are highly specialized.
Yes, of course.
So we deal
But the general Worcester people is not your clients.
No.
But yet it's the same with us.
Yeah.
When I was still at school, I said I couldn't live in Worcester for a lot of money. And then I ended up moving here and I became a photographer and had no money. But there couldn't have been a better place for us working in agriculture than Worcester.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the capital of the Brede River Valley.
But it's an hour and a half to anywhere in the Western Cape.
Yes. And that was in the beginning. I had some of these companies that our suppliers, that you have representatives and you have to convince them to connect with you so that you can know about all the new chemicals and developments in our field, and then they will say, "Oh yeah, but you are very rural." When they didn't want to come out, and now it's just everyone knows it's just an hour from everywhere. Courier companies, we get samples from everywhere, and we just have a request to do some work for a department in Australia, a government department. So that is shipping his DNA to us to do a test for them. Yeah, so it's in today's world, it doesn't matter where you are. Yeah,
It is pretty interesting. But I think you need to sketch a little bit
where we are now.
How many people work here and what you guys do.
Okay. Yeah, so we are at 10 staff members, and we have an additional industry placement. She's paid by a multinational company, but instead of them investing in developing or building their own laboratories, they placed her here. She has access to everything. We did a lot of training with her, and she runs their projects in our lab here.
Oh, wow,
so
that's
there are
cool.
11 staff members working here in Worcester, and I think that's one of my biggest, I feel when I reach the end of my career, I feel very happy that I created jobs for at least where it started from having not a job at all to creating quite a lot of jobs for people over time. Yeah, that is, and if you look at the bigger families and everyone that's involved, I really appreciate that. Yeah.
On that note, is that I think a lot of people are daunted by that growth aspect. We must grow. You want to do everything yourself. How did it come by? You said you quickly realized, listen, I need somebody else. So what was like the first breakthrough project, and where did you find somebody to help
Well,
you?
that was quite a challenge to find someone in 2005 in Worcester with a BSc degree. So I started, I knew someone who studied with me, who worked in this field, but he's not a scientist, he works in the grapevine industry. And I called him and I asked him, do you know of anyone who has a BSc degree in Worcester? And he told me about Debbie who was at home raising a child, and I convinced her to start part-time. Yeah. So as we became known, now we have people traveling from Stellenbosch and Paul and even Durbanville, Brackenfell area to come and work here. So it is, I would say, the legacy of the company. They really want to work here, so they don't even mind traveling every day. But just to say, you ask about a project. A scientist is driven by his or her curiosity to figure something out. So we know by being close to agriculture, and I started from the cereal industry, wheat and barley background, what are pressing issues. So then you figure out how are you going to help industry to solve that issue. And I like the very systematic approach of doing things like that. So when you look at a challenge and you work it out, you quickly figure out where you need support. So we've always, in all our projects, although we are not, in terms of a research team or a team, we're not that small anymore if you compare it with a specific team at a university focusing on a certain area. But if you look at the bigger companies, some people will still say you are a small company. But we've always collaborated with experts in the field because we are geneticists and we can take control of the genetic aspect of the problem. But everything is interrelated. So we work closely with plant pathologists, maybe one that specifies a specific disease, specialize on a specific disease, others specialize on other diseases. You work with the plant breeders who develop new varieties because the tools you develop are what they require. So a single project always have a lot of additional collaborators on it. And because I was fortunate enough, shortly after I completed my PhD, to do a postdoc at an overseas laboratory, I absolutely realized the value of the knowledge that's out in the world. And we are a bit separated from it sometimes because we are physically far from places like America and Europe, so we don't get the opportunity to visit conferences or workshops that frequently like they do. So there's a lot to learn from them, and I realized that very quickly. So in many of my projects from the onset, I started to convince international collaborators that we are trustworthy partners to work with, and that has paid off tremendously because that gave us access to the biggest possible international grants. It helped us to cement the legacy that we are a trustworthy partner in Africa to invest funds in, and that you will get research outputs. Yeah, so that is the key, although collaboration and making sure that you have the best team possible to answer that specific challenge or question you have on the table. And then you move on. When a new project comes, it's always looking at issues in industry, and then you design a new team, a network of people to address the problem.
Very, very interesting. And particularly activating and motivating the international connections like that. And I think it would be interesting to hear what you say. Has that become easier with the ease of communication that we have today, or is it still a major challenge? Has that trend made it easier for you?
I think it's easier now to communicate and maintain relationships, scientific relationships. Yeah, it's easier and quicker to do it nowadays, but the bar has been raised. It's incredibly high what the international partners require you to perform, and to the outputs you have to produce. So I think we just need to realize that we really have to put in a huge effort to make sure that we're up to standard, at least in terms of knowing what's going on in the world and what people are doing now. Maybe we don't have the funds here to have that specific instrument in the country or to do that approach, but at least you must be knowledgeable about it. Yeah, when you speak to your collaborators. And they're very, very, I find them very patient to teach and train. I've had partners who invested a lot in training in South African scientists. So as long as they see that you are willing to embrace that and to learn and to apply, then they are always willing to work with you.
Well, do you want to share some of the projects that you've worked with and the people you've worked with? I don't know. The floor is yours.
I think we've done, I don't want actually to highlight people or what's the proper English word to
to specify specific people.
Yeah, but there is one that I can say recently, but it's the work of the past 19 years. Yes. Recently, we managed to publish a paper in a peer-reviewed journal that is a very good journal. But what we did publish was the first whole genome sequence of a South African wheat cultivar. And that's
that's incredible.
Yeah. So, but we couldn't have done that without the funding we obtained internationally and our collaborators. So we teamed up with the best people in the world to do that. But what is so nice, it was our idea. I approached them and asked, would you be willing to work with us on this project? And it wasn't a project to generate this whole genome sequence. It was a project to isolate a specific disease resistance gene. We also refer to that as cloning, to clone the gene, and that is to determine the exact DNA sequence of that gene, because if you have it, you can figure out how does the resistance work, and then in the long term work out which genes are best to combine in plant varieties so that they stay resistant and that they don't it's not overcome the resistance by the pathogens. So that was the goal, but we succeeded, and we published it in early this year in Nature Genetics, which is one of our best peer-reviewed journals, and achieved this whole genome sequence and the cloning of the gene. So in an academic way, although we are very applied, we try to stay on a international standard, and we managed that with this paper.
Congratulations, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. But what happened now recently is that we started with a similar project on our indigenous speckworm, because in Africa, very few of our indigenous plant species have been sequenced yet. It's expensive exercise, but we are part of a network of laboratories initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation. It's called the Diplomics Network, and they support method development and training opportunities and creating capacity for service laboratories like us. And through them, we secured support to sequence the speckworm. But in that process, we developed methods to extract DNA from that plant that is of sufficient quality to sequence. So sequence is just to determine every base of the DNA string. And so I have a staff member who is at the moment at the John Innes Centre in the UK working with a bioinformatics team, and that's the people that know how to work with big biological data sets that runs for many days on very big computers to put all of the data together. And she's now learning how to do all of that so that she can come back and teach us to do it here in the next project. So we will be...
That's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but speckworm has become quite sought after plant and quite well recognized for its ability to absorb carbon.
Mm.
So I think it's also interesting that you're working on something that's actually become quite kind of famous in a way.
Yeah. No, it's also on purpose why we specific for that reason we chose speckworm as a kind of model to develop all these methods and knowledge in the group. We are fortunate to work with Ernst van Jaarsveld and Ansu Leroux, who's also from Worcester. She's an ecologist and Ernst is a botanist, and they have incredible knowledge about speckworm, so they help us to identify the specific speckworm we want to generate the first genome sequence of. And the plan is in future to look at the diversity across the country, because they've made a big collection and have a lot of knowledge about that, and to work with them to develop the tools to identify different types and to make sure that it is conserved as such, because it's not really a good thing to take a accession from one region that differs on a gene level from another one and go and plant it in that region.
Well, that's exactly the thing, that everybody says, yes, it's such a wonderful plant, but now it's being planted in the Kalahari and in the Kruger and where it shouldn't be actually.
Yeah.
Is it actually good for the environment if you do that? Yes, it does this, but then there's also the whole other bunch.
So we feel if we can on a genetic level show the diversity, then working with ecologists and botanists, that kind of decisions can be made better. Better decisions can be made.
Well, when we were in California now, we stayed at an Airbnb in Fresno. And there was speckworm in the garden. And we wondered if those people even know.
We were amazed. It was just there. We wondered, First of all, how did it get here? Secondly, do these people have any idea what this is and how well known it is, and for these properties? So,
and in Los Angeles,
Yes.
there was like, we went to a Whole Foods, and there was like a grove of the most beautiful Strelitzias next to the road, but like for long.
Yeah.
And we still said, well, look at this.
Yeah. So it is so nice to be involved in a project that's our own. Mm-hmm. It's been done in Africa for Africa. And so.
That's very exciting.
I mean, it's still for me, in a way, agriculture, because with the climate predictions, it's possible that these spectrum will be required for farmers with livestock to have food. And then we will can make informed decisions what farmers should plant, and still maintain the diversity, not losing what we have in nature.
Very interesting.
Very, very interesting. I mean, I didn't even realize that there were subspecies within the spectrum.
Yeah, I won't call it subspecies, but it's like humans.
Okay.
There's a lot of diversity.
Diversity, that's the word.
Diversity. And you want to maintain diversity. It's like you don't get family to intermarry.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Okay.
Can that happen to something like the spectrum, that there's not enough diversity in a specific area?
What can happen is that the diversity that there is over time lost, because people do monoculture and they just culture one type or one cutting from one place, because it can easily happen.
Because it's quite so easy.
It's so easy to make cuttings, and you can have 1 or 2 or 5 plants and you can make thousands of plants.
Okay.
Yeah. And then neglect what is in nature, maybe, and then before you see it, like we've seen for many other species, you've lost the original types. Yeah. Okay. So for us, it's important.
Because a small spectrum in my garden is from one plant.
Yes.
And I've got enough.
They plant out, you can plant them out quite easily. But so also, if you have less diversity like that and all the plants are from one cutting, if there's a disease that affects that particular plant, then they'll all get it.
That's the problem. And that's how you lose species.
Okay.
Because you don't have the diversity to go back to and bring in new types. Yeah.
Okay.
So what can be, well, let's say there's one, we can use spectrum now, but it can be anything. There's one particular species that's resistant to, let's say, all the diseases, but that one is slowly diminishing. Can you, do you cultivate that? Can you store the DNA or
well, I think there's live connections of this at Stellenbosch, Worcester, Ernst and Ansu maintain another live collection. So it's like maintaining the diversity in nature, making sure you have these gardens like our Karoo Botanical Garden here in Worcester to keep those types growing there. Yeah. Best to keep them live.
Yes.
In nature. Yeah.
So a slight subject change. On a daily basis, like today or this week, what are the kind of projects that you'd be working on? The kind of
people, the bread and butter.
Yes, the people that would contact you. Who would be your general client? What would be the profile of your clients that contact you, and what kind of requests do they put through to you?
I would say the majority of what we do here is research and development. So it's like big research projects, which I will talk about now. And then we also have a commercial component where, as it became known, there's a laboratory working with DNA on a genetic gene level. In the agricultural sector, people came to us with simple questions like identity issues, like nurseries, plant improvement companies, plant breeding companies, where they work, for instance, with something like a fruit tree that you buy in cuttings, and only in 3 years' time you see the fruit. So we can do identity check and ensure that they distribute the correct cuttings of a specific variety.
So like verification of a variety.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of that. We do a lot of that for the fruit and grapevine industry, sorting things out like that. At the moment in the lab, we have cherry samples, apple samples, and peanuts.
Peanuts.
Okay.
Yeah. So we recently started working with peanuts. It's quite an interesting.
I suppose there can't be anybody with allergies.
Yeah, they shouldn't eat it then.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's very interesting. Yeah, we're trying to sort out seed purity issues in the peanut industry, so that when they distribute seed, that it is of the correct variety.
Okay.
But the R&D component is actually our focus. So we are like, I would say, any other university or research institute. We have a focus on research to develop tools or knowledge that can be implemented in agriculture. We like to work out if there's a useful trait in a specific plant, say in a wheat or a barley plant, a specific disease resistance. This plant is very resistant to a disease, but you don't know why. You don't know, is it one gene conferring that resistance or more than one gene? And where are they located on the chromosomes? And then we like to identify DNA markers for them because you can't see them. So we have means in the lab to look at these genes using specific technologies, and then we develop those tools. And once we've developed and figured out how many genes are involved, then we start working with the breeders that then cross that plant with the resistance, but maybe it doesn't yield that well, with a high yielding variety that they need to spray a lot. And then we use DNA markers to track those genes in the children or in the progeny and help them to select the ones that carry the genes. And they also do then their test with yield, and where the traits are combined, those plants are then retained to produce a new variety. So we are just a small role player helping the breeders then to develop these improved varieties. And then the nice thing about that is then ultimately, the farmer is planting it and he's producing that, and it ends up as the wheat bread on our table. So it's very fulfilling, I feel, to work in this space because it is very important to every human. We realize now in the pandemic how important is food security, and South Africa never had a problem. We always had flour, we never ran out of things. And
But on that subject now, you keep talking about breeders, and with us, we've done work with some of the great breeders, so we know what the process is like. But then
a very long process.
a very long process. But then everybody is saying, but it's GMO, genetically modified. How much out there is actually genetically modified, and what? I don't think people know what genetically modified means.
It's a term that gets everybody jumping up and down, but a lot of people don't really know what exactly that means. I'm sure you get that question often.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on GMOs, I want to declare, but I have no problem with GMOs. I don't think the world will be able to, we will not be able to feed the world population if they are not GMOs, or at least this new technology which is not supposed to be seen as GMOs, gene editing, where they just make a slight change. But people can get very upset about the GMO field. So I'm not an expert. I don't think I should be telling them that. But what I know is that in all the fruit crops currently grown here, and wheat and barley, there are no GMOs. GMO traits are currently, as far as I know, used in cotton, maize, and soybeans. And we eat a lot of that, maize and soybeans.
But also what a lot of people, not all the maize is eaten. A lot of it is used for other things.
For animals and things like that.
Not just that. This is I don't know what the exact thing is, but in certain thickness and lubrication
glues.
things and glues, they get a lot of derivatives from maize. And there's farmers farming specifically with those varieties to supply those
I'm learning
industries.
something now.
I've actually
Didn't know.
and well, this is a long time ago. I heard that the lubrication paste that they use on oil rigs to drill is made from
Awesome.
maize.
Oh, wow.
I'm just correct to see if it.
Yeah.
And toothpaste. There's a lot of the ingredients from toothpaste comes from maize again.
Yeah. So I think if you want to have a GMO discussion, I think it's good to put a specialist group together.
Oh yeah. I was just curious because I'm
It's
pretty
not,
sure.
it's very well regulated in South Africa. You can't just plant GMOs and feed it to people. The stuff that is being planted, that are being planted and that's being fed to people, it's well known that these crops do have GMO construct in it. And what I just know is that with this recent there's a worm, I'm not sure, is it a false armyworm or the armyworm? It's one of those two that came from Uganda, marched down to South Africa. All our neighbor countries didn't have maize crops. We had to export to them to feed them. And if we didn't have GMO maize, we would have had the same problem. So that was a rescue to the South African community that our producers...
To the African community.
Yes, sub-Saharan, because we exported to all our neighboring countries. They didn't have any maize crops recently. With this worm marching down.
Interesting. Good heavens, I didn't even hear about
I
that.
think it's a false armyworm, but I don't know exactly.
But that in itself is pretty incredible. I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier, and that is that helping to improve varieties and improve disease resistance and stuff like that. And you were saying it must be incredibly personally satisfying knowing that you've worked on something, you've achieved something, and then, as you say, then the bread is on your table, and this stuff that you're going to eat now is something that you personally and your team have worked on to achieve that. That's phenomenal.
And there's very few people that will actually pay recognition to them.
Yes.
Yeah. But we are a nice, it's a small, it's like a puzzle, and the bigger, you are just a one member in a much bigger system to get to that goal. But it is very satisfying to do that. And I mean, obviously we are curious. We want to figure things out. And then it's nice to make it practical.
Yes.
I think that's where CenGen is maybe a bit different from a purely academic institution. We always like the implementation part. So we always play a role in that as well, to make sure it's being used ultimately. Yeah. Now it is, if you speak to any of the other team members, you will also see their eyes shine when they speak about things going out.
That's incredible too.
Yeah.
If you think about, and this brings me to the next question, if you think about when you're a young person and you think you want to do this, you want to change the world. That, by just achieving that, by helping people, there you've done it. Yeah. And that connects us to the reason why we met you in the first place, is that here you are in the middle of Worcester and you are running this Centre of Excellence for Science and for Agriculture, about genes in agriculture, and people around us don't even know about who you are and what you do, and that you organized recently this outreach to high school children and their teachers to teach them about what you do and show them the opportunities within your sector for young people to consider. That's incredible. Tell us a bit about how you put that together and how that's developed for you.
Yeah, we as it become known that there is a lab here, because I mean obviously there are people that know that we are here. We get contacted by children who want to come and job shadow, and the first thing when they walk in here is that they will tell us, oh, when we get to the genetics, it's so difficult. And our teacher also say it's very difficult. And I thought that should change, and I thought maybe if they understand all the food we eat and where it comes from, it will be more not that foreign topic. that they can relate more with it. So we decided with the support from Diplomix to start hosting these small workshops where we first approached the life science teachers in the Breede River Valley, and we have excellent collaboration also from the Western Cape Education Department. And they brought the life science teachers here, and we show them what we do, and we incorporate the practical, and it was an eye-opener for them. So within a week after we hosted our first workshop last year, we were contacted by the Western Cape Education Department that they want to send all their life science subject advisors.
Sure.
And then they visited us a few weeks later, and so this has now developed into an incredible initiative where we also now, during Science Week this year, hosted the first learners. And because we have not a big space here, we focus on 12 resource poor schools from the region, and we, with the help of the teachers, identified the learners that did best in their June exam. It was sort of a kind of incentive.
Yes.
The best candidate get the opportunity to attend a June workshop. And that we got such an enthusiastic group of learners. It was just amazing now to share with them why we are passionate about this field and to give them an understanding. And we hope this will filter through. Obviously, it's an ongoing initiative, and every year we will reach more teachers and learners. And we hope that some of them will then consider the importance of this field and see that it is a possible career path. Yeah.
It would be incredible, because those pupils that came through this, the chance of them walking through your door to come work here will probably only going to be in 10 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
When you might not even be here anymore. So
But you're planting seeds.
yes, it's one of those things that you almost wonder, you almost wish there was somebody already that...
Yeah.
You,
No, but I know it will happen.
yes, it will, for sure.
And I think what is more important is that the public just understand where food comes from. That they appreciate that it's an incredible, actually scientific and agricultural effort to put that on the table, and that we should look after our agriculture sector. Yeah, and I think we realized it during the pandemic how valuable this
I think it's
sector
now.
is. Yeah.
But what do you think you guys, us, anybody else there can do to get that more into... I don't want to keep saying the city people, but it's often the city people that don't
People
know.
that are disconnected from agriculture.
Yes, it's the people here know about the stuff being grown around us, but what can we do to get that more, to make them realize where it comes from? What do you think?
Sure, I just hope that the people that move out from Worcester now, obviously they'll go to universities and places where they hopefully will spread the message about the value of this sector. Yeah, so I know there's our supporter Diplomix is very really like this project, so they also started workshops in the city. But,
Okay.
Yeah, but maybe that's now more general information, and they don't have the advantage maybe like we have with the real projects going on in the lab that's actually agriculture. But I think people are starting to spread the message now that it plays a role in everything.
So that which you were doing here has been an inspiration to Diplomix to roll it out further.
Well, they also had a training initiative more also focused on scientists, but they really like the school connection, and they've hosted their first workshops last year.
That's exciting.
Slightly different from ours, but still taking in learners from schools and bringing them to their laboratories. The laboratories, they took them to also do some human work, and which is just as important in health.
But not just if you take humans out of the way, there's people still eat. They're going to keep eating meat. So we're not much different.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. And are there any dreams that lie ahead for you with CenGen that you still want to tackle?
Yeah, I think I would like to expand the facility. There's lots of technologies and things we don't do yet or can't do yet because we still have to learn how to do it, and we still have to find funding in South Africa to do some of the new approaches. So we acquired the building next door. So I have this vision of a research park in Worcester.
Oh, wow,
research
that's
park.
exciting.
Yes. I want to connect these two buildings.
Okay.
It's empty at the moment, but we have the capacity.
Research park.
Yes, I will call it a science park or a research park. We'll see.
Okay.
But it should be. And then you have it here in Worcester.
What do you want, if you say a research park, or what is that?
It's just a bigger place where more things happen. Yeah. I mean, I can't get to where my staff member is at the moment. I have a bigger research park. The one institute she's visiting is part of a bigger research park in the UK where at least 3,000 scientists work.
Jeez.
So can you imagine the knowledge that is in that few square kilometers? Yeah.
So you're seeing an opportunity for more labs coming here?
Yeah, or the company growing bigger, doing more things and creating more jobs. Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, I think Worcester should be very happy that your husband moved to Worcester and brought you along.
It was a crisis at the time for myself, a personal crisis. But if I look back, I think
It's a good
I
place to
had
start.
a very interesting career. So,
Sure. No, it's
Somebody
amazing.
told me that the word in Japanese, now I really don't know here, but the word in Japanese for crisis and opportunity is the same word.
oh,
So if you think about how often when there is a crisis, you have to do something and an opportunity is presented, which you take forward.
yeah.
And if you look back over your career,
Yeah.
it's never easy. But look at how far you've come. And I mean, were you even thinking of expanding broader and doing big things in Worcester? As you say, we are actually very well located in the agricultural sector, in that Worcester is like a real central hub for the whole of the Breda River, for the Hex River, for up into the Langeberg area, up into the Swartland, and even into
Wolfenberg, Rijn.
yes, and
But I mean, all the groundnut work we are doing, I'm saying peanuts, but I also say groundnuts, are coming from the north of the country. So, yeah.
wonderful. And are you affiliated? I'm just for interest sake. Are you affiliated with the University of Stellenbosch? And
I have a personal affiliation with them, yes. So I attended yesterday a workshop with them, yeah. It's very nice to be like an industry partner. Because I got yesterday quite a bit of insight into what they require or their challenges when having to teach so many students and the practical plan for the year. And yeah,
so it's the Agri-Sciences department.
yeah.
Okay.
And genetics. So I'm affiliated with the Department of
Okay.
Genetics.
It's just nice for you to mention that.
Yeah, and we sometimes support their students with projects.
Oh, nice.
Technology that we have. We did some work for a master student who's now writing up. So then we helped her generate data here on equipment we have that they don't have. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Well, I think what a lot of people think is that, especially talking grapes and the fruit, is that the breeders are on the other side of the water. They're in America and Europe and all that. Is there anything that South African breeders are looking at the moment that's quite interesting that could be? I know a lot of these things are.
Well, if you look, I know that the fruit tree or fruit crop industries, they are fortunate. They can breed a variety abroad and bring it in to South Africa and test it here.
Yes.
And it should actually go through extensive periods of testing before releasing it as a variety. Otherwise, you'll run into problems. But we work closely, I mean, we've supported the table grape breeder of the ARC in her table grape breeding program.
What's her name?
Phyllis Berger. So we help her to track some disease-resistant
it's
seeds.
exciting.
Yes. But when I speak of breeders, I refer mostly to like the cereal breeders, because you can't import a variety bred overseas and plant it in South Africa.
So it's not allowed?
It's not adapted. It will never perform as well as a locally bred variety.
Do you test them also to see?
We don't test it, but we work closely with the breeders who do that, and we often attend their producers' days when they report to the farmers, we have these lines now coming up.
Yes.
They look promising. Next year will be the final year that before we will release it, or we've just released these varieties. This is how they look. Next year you can order the seed. They have this traits combined or things like that. So it's a bit of a difference in the cereal industry versus the fruit industry. A lot of the breeding happens abroad for the fruit industry, while locally the cereal work has to be done ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
And well, I don't know, within the fruit, certain breeders have got their varieties and then the growers must pay a royalty on them. Do you get that in a cereal as well?
They've moved to that system for wheat now.
Okay.
They call it in-point royalty. So the farmers pay on the amount they produce.
The tonnage.
So that the tonnage, so that the money can be invested back into breeding. Otherwise, the breeders don't make any money.
Obviously.
Yeah, if they keep the seed and just multiply it themselves. Yeah. So in some of the cereals, they've changed to that system. And crops like maize, they have hybrids. So you can't make your own seed. So you have to buy hybrid seed each year from the company. So it varies between the crops, what systems they use.
I think that could be quite a big minefield for like wheat guys, because what stops the farmer from putting up a silo and putting enough away for next year? And
that's a problem.
Skipping
and
the royalties.
The breeding companies move away, and so we're not going to breed for wheat for South Africa anymore. So ultimately the producer will lose out, and that's why they implemented that system, so that there's money generated at the silos when the seed come in.
Yes.
Never mind where the seed comes from that produce that crop, they pay a levy over on the amount they
Okay, so the people that actually buys it from the farmers, they pay the royalties.
They manage the royalty. So instead of paying an X amount to the farmer, that amount is deducted. And that is paid over to a central fund that manages that.
I was just thinking that's like a minefield, because the wheat called XYZ looks exactly like WV.
Yeah.
So you're going to have somebody like
luckily
testing all
it's
the
quite
time.
an open system. The farmers declare which variety from which company. So it's more from which company.
Okay.
So that the right company gets the correct amount back.
So what characteristics would, for instance, a wheat breeder be trying to seek? Higher yields?
That's the ultimate for the producer, because that's how he makes money. The input costs are so high, so they focus on yield. Okay. But there are many things contributing to yield. And if you can lower your input cost as well, like spray less pesticides or fungicides.
More disease resistant.
So if you can breed a more disease resistant plant and reduce some of the spraying, you lower the input cost. But we are also looking as best as we can, but it's very complex, try to look at yield or drought tolerance, that kind of traits.
Okay.
So that is the challenge.
It wouldn't be anything like flavor. I mean, in wheat, that's probably the last thing they'd look at. But I mean,
and they definitely look at specific baking and milling quality parameters. So
okay.
that
That's
every
interesting.
variety or wheat line, before it's released as a variety or a cultivar, goes through a rigorous testing. They even do baking test. And They
Okay.
do milling test. I mean, the miller also don't want to. He pays an X amount for the seed. So when he mills the seed, he wants to get as much flour as
Yes, of
possible.
course.
So he doesn't want to lose. So he wants the wheat with the highest extract of flour. So all of
Interesting.
those things are measured. So that's what's so fascinating for me working in this field, because you understand it's so complex, and it makes me proud of South Africa that we have all these advanced systems to make sure these things are in place, that we do get the best possible product out there. So it's not just planting a
incredible.
wheat plant and then
No.
you have bread. It's a long.
No, it's incredible, and consumers very often have no idea about
Yeah.
this.
They really have, not often, they have no idea.
Yeah. So I think if we can play a role, just to have an appreciation for what all the role players are doing,
Indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
to put that bread on the table, or that beer in your hand, or that nice apple. Yeah.
I always say to people, if you think about it, if you go to your consumer personality, when you go to your shop, you're normally in a hurry. You push your trolley down the aisle, and you're thinking about what have I got to do tonight, and maybe the kids' homework or whatever, and you're just grabbing stuff to put in your trolley to buy. You don't think, where did that apple or wheat or wherever come from? You just have it. But if you weren't there putting the money, buying it, it wouldn't be there.
No, if it was fraud,
If it wasn't there, if it was... So consumers, they just assume the stuff will be there. But if it isn't there, if it isn't up to eating standard, what would they do? You know, so it's one of those things that people take agriculture for granted.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And is there any particular message that you would like to say to people about
questions to us,
or questions, or anything that you would like to say that, you know, from your field, the contribution of your field, how does that impact the public or the agricultural sector?
I would rather want to say that I strongly feel that we should invest more into research. Research in South Africa, sure, the amount of money we have to work with compared to some or the most other international partners is actually quite not a lot. I know we have lots of challenges, but if you think about how important food is, I really think it should be prioritized, and there should be more funding awarded towards agricultural science or research. Yeah, so I hope things in the country will improve, that we will have additional funding for research, because I think that is very important.
And can a private individual invest in that?
Yeah, but you do get these philanthropic people. Like, I've had a grant in which Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation invested in, but it was an international grant that I secured through the BBC of the UK Science Councils. So you do get the Bill and Melinda Gates that does that, but it's not.
They don't come along every day.
Yeah. So mostly it is the farmers, producers who produce food, and then on the tonnage they deliver, a small levy is taken, it's another levy, a research levy. And then those funds are then distributed to scientists who apply. But I mean, the producers are already under incredible stress. So I hope there could be more like a bigger government allocation to agricultural sciences. Yeah.
And we've been doing quite a few of these videos to showcase some of these projects, and it's been incredibly interesting.
Yes. So,
Especially with table grapes, we've done some interesting things with table grapes.
yes,
And there's more interesting things coming up.
indeed. But very interesting to hear from you about the cereals, something that we didn't know about, and I think very few people in the public sector even know about that.
Now, we've got a thing that we started with this thing that we asked the previous person to ask a question for the next person.
And anonymously, it's just fun.
So, what is? May I know who's the next person being interviewed in the sense in which field or?
It will be agriculture.
So first of all, we want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Yes. But
So
your
we'll
question
start with that.
you ask afterwards.
When you finish
Okay.
chatting, you can think
So
of
I
something.
get a question now from someone else in that.
Yes.
From somebody else who doesn't know
Okay.
who it's going to be for.
Okay.
Now, this is this question could actually be better for somebody else, but the lady we spoke to earlier is from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is happening with a lot of agricultural stuff. Would you recommend people investing into Zimbabwe? Or what do you, or let's change it a bit. What is your perception of Zimbabwe before you answer
And
that?
have you maybe even worked with anyone from Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Talk.
So I must say recently I saw the recent post about a lot of improvements in agriculture, but I'm not up to date with how stable the country is. So I'm still with I still have a worry about the stability of Zimbabwe, but I'm not up to date. So I don't think I should answer that. But what I can say is I have worked. I had a PhD student I was a co-supervisor for a PhD student who's a wheat breeder in Zimbabwe. And he works for a company that I also know some of the people that work in the lab that were trained in the UK and some of the best scientific exposure possible. So I think they have key people there that have the knowledge, and if they can provide to them a stable environment and financially and socially, I think there's a lot of promise, because we've heard it's one of the countries with the most fertile soil. So I'm sure they can be back to one of the best producers in Africa.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, if you have you got anything more to add, or are you happy to wrap up?
No, I'm happy to wrap up.
So, Renee, it's been wonderful chatting to you.
Yeah. It's inspirational.
It's very inspirational to hear what you're doing right here, how you started, and what you've built in the time that you've been in Worcester, and that you even have dreams to take it further. It's a huge inspiration for our community, and also for the agricultural sector, that you're providing this high-tech science facility for our plant agricultural sector around here. And we wish you the very best of luck with all your exciting plans for the future. Thanks for chatting to us.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot. Thanks for visiting us. You're welcome in future again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.